Jose R. Peralta, a state senator from Queens, defected to the breakaway Independent Democratic Conference in January. He may face a primary challenge next year. Nathaniel Brooks, for the New York Times. It was Monday evening when the cell phone of Heather Stewart, a liberal activist in New York, buzzed with a text message from the new executive director of the state Democratic Party, Geoff Berman. "Did you see the I.D.C. news?" he asked her. "Left you a voicemail." The I.D.C. news was the sudden deal proposed by four influential players in New York Democratic politics to reunite the long-wearing factions of the party in Albany that have divided it for years and left Republicans, while still a minority, in charge of the state Senate. In his voicemail, Ms. Stewart said that Mr. Berman predicted that she would be happy with the developments, especially because they came just days before a Democratic rally they were planning together to protest President Trump in Midtown Manhattan, starring Gov. Andrew M. Cuomo. But as Ms. Stewart read the fine print of the proposed agreement, including delaying unification for months, she was anything but happy. "This feels really duplicitous," she said. 36 grassroots groups would denounce the terms, even as both the mainline Senate Democrats and the breakaway group known as the Independence Democratic Conference, or I.D.C., agreed to it. And the rally, intended to be a symbol of New York Democratic unity in the face of a Republican-led federal government, was moved across town to be outside Mr. Trump's Cipriani fundraiser. The governor's office declined until late Friday to confirm that Mr. Cuomo would not attend, even though he had sent the original invitation to party activists. What had begun so promisingly on Monday as the first real breakthrough in years had quickly given voice to the familiar bickering and backbiting that has come to define dysfunctional Democratic politics in the state. The governor, a deal-making centrist, proud of his pragmatism, said that it was impossible to please all the people, all the time. "It's about unifying the Democrats, not universal political support by everyone," Mr. Cuomo said in a phone interview late Friday. "It's as close to peace in the Middle East as you can get." Some of the activists on the left seem intent on punishing the I.D.C. members for their nearly 7-year relationship with the Republicans and want nothing short of complete surrender, highly unlikely while they still hold the keys to the majority. Phone banking against I.D.C. candidates has also continued this week, as volunteers text and call potential primary voters in their districts, urging them to reject so-called Trump Democrats. The dissatisfaction stems from a variety of concerns, including the lack of enforcement mechanisms for making good on the promises of unity, the planned timing of the unification after the all-important budget season in March, allowing Senate Republicans to hold power during that period, and the fact that the I.D.C. had promised to return to the fold before, in 2014. That time around, the Democrats suffered humiliating losses in the general election, and the I.D.C. returned to working with the GOP. "And that makes die-hard liberals very wary. Talk about deja vu," said Zephyr Teachout, who mounted a surprisingly strong Democratic primary challenge to Mr. Cuomo in 2014. "There's a number of questions here, including whether you should believe it at all." Ms. Teachout seemed particularly vexed by the idea that Mr. Cuomo wouldn't call special elections for two soon-to-be empty seats, in usually Democratic districts, until after the budget, leaving the party short-handed. "It's one of the most important budgets in New York history at a time when we are facing a national Republican threat," she said. "And that's unacceptable." Mr. Cuomo has not said exactly when special elections will occur, but the letter which sketched out the deal on Monday said it anticipated a post-budget special election to fill those seats. The letter was signed by Representative Joseph Crowley, the highest-ranking New York Democrat in the House, Byron Brown, the state party chairman Christine C. Quinn, the party vice chairwoman, and Hector J. Figueroa, president of 32BJ Service Employees International Union. The plans they detailed for the 23-member Senate Democratic Conference and the 8-member Independent Democratic Conference to unify were the most concrete of the years-long stalemate. But even as terms of peace were proffered, some Democrats continued to gear up for intra-party political warfare in 2018. Primary challenges to I.D.C. members continued to take shape this week, including news that Jessica Ramos, a former aide to Mayor Bill de Blasio, was said to be mulling a run against Jose R. Peralta, the Queens senator who defected to the I.D.C. in January. In Manhattan, Robert Jackson, a former New York City councilman, is challenging Marisol Alcantara, who joined the I.D.C. last year, calling on voters to reject the first-term senator and her band of turncoat Democrats. Two other I.D.C. members, Senators David Valesky, of the Syracuse area, and Jesse Hamilton of Brooklyn, may also be facing primary fights. There is also the small issue that even if a real deal were to materialize, the Democrats are still short the 32 votes they need to lead the 63-seat chamber. That's because another Democrat, Senator Sim Heffelder of Brooklyn, has been siding with Republicans since 2012 and hasn't committed to returning to the fold. Republicans in the Senate, faced with the prospect of losing their sole foothold of power in a deep blue New York, have also suggested that even without Mr. Felder, they could still hold power through 2018 thanks to the rules of Senate, which prevent changes in leadership without a 38-seat majority. For their part, Senate Democrats said that they will not mount any primaries against the I.D.C. if the deal holds, and that they hope to take a leadership role before the 2018 session concludes in June. "We have always said we wanted Democrats to work together and that must be accomplished during this legislative session," said Mike Murphy, a spokesman for Senator Andrea Stewart Cousins, the leader of the mainline Democratic coalition. On Friday, the governor's office was also defending the potential deal, including from an attack this week from Mayor Bill de Blasio, who called such negotiations a charade. Aides pointed out the agreement outlined by Mr. Brown also was signed by liberal stalwarts like Mr. Figueroa, whose union is a major supporter of the Working Families Party, whose own state director had questioned its timing. Mr. Cuomo has also argued that primary fights would be counterproductive in a year in which Democrats have high hopes both in the state and nationwide, and are facing major conservative challenges to policies like reproductive rights and health care. But for now, the party remains divided. Although Mr. Cuomo had sent out the original invitation for Saturday's rally, Richard Otso Party, a spokesman for Mr. Cuomo, said late Friday that the governor would be going to Puerto Rico for a trip long in the works. Ms. Stewart said that as late as Sunday she had been in discussions with Mr. Berman about what Mr. Cuomo would say at the rally. By the end of the week, liberal activists were busy making plans for another demonstration outside a different Cipriani location, protesting a fundraiser featuring former President Bill Clinton to be held for Mr. Cuomo this month. Shane Goldmacher reported from New York and Jesse McKinley reported from Albany.